Okay. We've seen a shift away from Europe. We used to think about Europe as being the centre of power in our globe. NATO came from Europe. You had the European Union, which was successful at first. All the money was there, all the former colonies, the British Empire, Spanish empires. Europe is now broke. There's no manufacturing left in Europe, it's all shifted to Asia. The growth areas in this planet are all in Asia. India is becoming a powerhouse. China is a powerhouse. And on our doorstep, we've got a nation of 250 million people in Indonesia. So geopolitically, it's a big word, but geopolitically, power has shifted away from the geography of Europe towards the geography of Asia, our region. America isn't really close friends with us because they like our accents. We're geopolitically convenient. We're in a good spot. It's convenient for them to use our bases to station their military. So you've got a shift away from Europe towards Asia. And you can see that graphic. The major population is China, Asia. Economic growth. In Europe or the US, it's happening in Asia. Economic growth. You want to start a new business? You set it up in Asia where there are hundreds of millions of potential consumers. Actually, billions, not hundreds of millions. One of your readings was about economic challenges in Indonesia. Massive economic challenges. We're going to see how they've managed to get their way out of those challenges through trade. It's still a developing state. But a massive population, many still live in poverty. About 40% live below the poverty line of 2%, $2 a day. So they're still getting their way out. Here we go, 40% less than $2 a day. And there's a little comparison so we can get a picture of where Indonesia is. Per capita income, on average, each person contributes $4,700 to the economy. The average Australian contributes $42,000. So there's still a huge disparity between Indonesia and Australia, but the picture we're painting is one of Indonesia getting themselves out of the muck and becoming a significant player. Yes, that's from 2012, most recently. I'm helping build the context, the economic context. So, in essence, this is all going to be about trade. This whole PowerPoint is about trade, and it's going to link to some other things the course says we have to know about trade. But in essence, Indonesia has got themselves out of the economic quicksand through trade. Bilateral trade with Australia, multilateral trade. Quotes from Mr. Yudhoyono, President. We have even greater opportunities for achieving more productive and larger trade and investment. To seize these opportunities, our region needs to be more interconnected and interlinked. What do those two words remind you of? Yeah. So, the connectedness of our region has helped Indonesia. The fact that a big Australian mining company with really good engineers and really good, what do you call rock specialists? Geologists. The fact that we have that intellectual knowledge and we can buy and mine in Indonesia, extract the resources, sell the resources on the open market, pay the tax to the Indonesians, that's possible because of globalisation. Transportation has allowed Australian workers to fly in, do 6 weeks of work, fly out back to Australia for 2 weeks of holiday and go back. The internet has allowed workers to go to Indonesia, work in the mines and still be connected to home via Skype. So globalisation has made all these things possible. We're just getting started. There are so many opportunities for our region, but in his case, he's the president of Indonesia. He's interested in Indonesia. Interestingly, he doesn't see this as a flaw. Europe is having this discussion right now. It wants to stop being connected. England wants to get out of the EU. Spain is talking about getting out. So Europe is going in the opposite direction. They're talking about less connectedness, going back to their cultural roots.
Why would that be?
in the UK, they're starting to have discussions about how they've lost too much sovereignty. They've given up too many rights. And I got a letter in the mail in the holidays, which reads, Elecciones al Parlamento Europeo 25 de Mayo. Si desea votar, it's in Spanish. It's from the Spanish embassy saying European Parliament elections are coming up. You have the right to vote. You need to do this, this, and this if you want to vote in those elections. Because I have this little sucker, a Spanish passport. But I'm Spanish. I was born in Spain. But there is enormous discussion. Yeah. So everyone in Europe can vote in the European elections, but there's enormous discussion about whether they still want to be a part of the European Parliament. Lots of people want to be less connected. Untitled is saying that they've managed to get themselves in that position because of the interconnectedness. This is a Wordle. I think I've used them in the past. I took a speech which Mr. Untitled gave about trade. I plugged it into Wordle and it picked out the most common terms. Trade. So you can see the type of terms he uses the most. Trade, growth, market, economic developing. This language all around economic growth, improving the economy, trading with neighbours. And I thought I'd read to you the first 3 short paragraphs. I won't use the accent, that would be way too fast. Selamat pagi, good morning. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to Jakarta. Indonesia is honoured to host the World Export Development Forum on the theme of linking growth markets. This forum is very timely. It is taking place at a time when governments are exploring new ways to stimulate growth, job creation, and trade. With that in mind, and in thinking about the sessions that lay ahead of us over the next 2.5 days, it is useful for us to understand why growth markets are so important to developing and transition economy countries. With the ongoing Eurozone uncertainty and faltering economic growth in other developed economies, it has become clear that the drivers of global economic growth are to be increasingly found in the growth markets of the South. And of course, he goes on and on for about an hour. So that came from a much longer speech that the President gave. But you can see their focus is absolutely on trade. Cool. Right. So Indonesia is going to do 2 things. It's going to pursue bilateral trade with Australia and multilateral trade with Asia. These are the 2 actions that they're going to take. Bilateral trade is the first one we're going to look at, and then later multilateral trade. Why does trade matter? I love this video. It's from the 60s. It is.
The story of foreign trade is a story that is most important to the vital problems of nationalism and internationalism. Countries striving for their own economic advantage, but wishing for global understanding and peace. For centuries, foreign trade has been the subject of arguments, articles, books, speeches.
Foreign trade is the key to prosperity. Free trade will bring on a Great Depression.
A high tariff policy will lead to war. We must protect our standard of living from the competition of cheap foreign labor.
Sometimes in this great rich country of ours, it must seem we can build anything, that we can grow anything, that we have everything. We feel powerful, prosperous. We feel we can trade with the whole world or not as we wish. But is trade, two-way trade, important to our nation and to the entire world? Well, let's look at the world. Here are the people of the earth. They represent the work of the world and the markets of the world. Not very evenly distributed, are they? And here are the industrial areas, where people produce goods, generally different goods in different countries. Not evenly spread around the world here either. And the resources used by these people in these industries, they are unevenly distributed. So as the world of nations becomes more interdependent, across the trade lanes move certain goods from the countries producing more than they can use to other countries whose people want and need these things. And don't forget the so-called invisibles, the investments and services, such as insurance, shipping, and travel, which also can be considered as exports and imports. All right, is foreign trade as simple as that? Well, let's see. Let's take one example. When one factory exports tractors to Brazil, in the office of the export manager, perhaps we can see what makes foreign trade different from domestic trade, the rather free, unhampered trade within our borders.
He gets into real specifics about all the different limitations on trade. It's a short introduction about the importance of trade. Specifically, Indonesia has pursued bilateral trade with Australia. Which one do I go for? Both of these are about Australia and Indonesia trading with each other.
China is now comfortably Australia's largest trading partner, and that trade is only going to get bigger in the years to come. But while much of the business community focuses on maximising its opportunities in China, other markets of equal promise are not getting the same attention. One of those is Australia's nearest Asian neighbour, Indonesia, which has transformed itself from a dictatorship to democracy and growing economic powerhouse in less than a decade. A man who definitely does see the possibilities for Australian business in Indonesia is Ian Satchwell, who's the head of the Australia-Indonesia Business Council, and Ian joins me now from Jakarta. Ian, you're a 35-year veteran of Indonesia and you believe Australia's business relationships with Indonesia are underdone. Why do you believe that?
I think that we had the Asian crisis and a near meltdown of the Indonesian economy back in 1997 and 98. Subsequently, the rise of China caused a lot of Australian businesses to focus on China, and pretty well literally and mentally Australian business people have flown over Indonesia on their way to China. But I'm pleased to say there is growing recognition of the extraordinary transformation and growth of the Indonesian economy.
Well, just on that point, I'm sure most Australians aren't aware that Indonesia's economy is growing at about 6.5% a year, and within the next 13 to 15 years it's predicted its economy will be the size of Australia's. So what opportunities is Australian business missing out on in Indonesia at the moment?
Well, the Indonesian economy, yes, you're right, is growing, and indeed it will be quite a bit bigger than Australia within a decade. The Indonesian market of 240 million people heading for 250 million, rapidly becoming wealthier, a lot of people moving into the middle class, is a fantastic consumer market. So at that level, a lot of people are looking for increasingly expensive goods, from foodstuffs through to higher value manufactured goods, services in particular, sophisticated financial services. And Australia is good at all of those things, and so there are a lot of opportunities for Australian business. As well, Indonesia is a very rich mineral and oil and gas province, so Australian companies involved in minerals and oil and gas have also got great prospects, although there are some issues around the mining laws in Indonesia that we've had some publicity on recently.
Is there a perception in Indonesia that
But there's a shift towards working closer with Indonesia, and what Indonesia has done with Australia is pursue a trade agreement. And the trade agreement is the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So that's the action. The two states have pursued, the action they've taken is to sign a trade agreement. And the aim is essentially a free trade agreement, a bilateral trade agreement for both states. So if you can turn to page 9 and 10, in the subject reader, I've taken a page from this agreement. Can you have one between two, that should be fine. Can you open up to the agreement, page 9 and 10, and just these two short prompts. What is it? So what is the VCE? What progress has it made? 9 and 10. So I've taken two little summaries from much bigger documents. Make it as short as possible. What is it? What progress has been made? Global actors, we need to be able to talk about how effective or ineffective they've been. So the effective part, they're up to the second round of negotiations. That's somewhat effective. It's a symbol that they're making progress. Two-way trade between Australia and Indonesia is $14 billion. So Indonesia's efforts have been successful somewhat. $14 billion in two-way trade. This stat I really like. 38 Australian companies operate 120 mines in Indonesia. Yes. So it's a sign of bilateral trade. These are bilateral trade indicators. These two states are engaged in bilateral trade. That's the source. That's where I got the source from. Don't worry about the white paper part. It's a government document which says the current state of trade affairs. That's where I got that information. And we actually know a little bit more about one of those examples. We know about the Grasberg mine. This is an example of based in Indonesia. So what you conclude is that Indonesia's action pursuing bilateral trade has been effective. They're making progress on negotiations, $14 billion in two-way trade, and they've managed to encourage lots of other companies to engage. All this represents a sign of the effectiveness of Indonesia's actions. Yes? Source of the stat. And information in an article, and I won't get you to read it together, but I'll just read two short paragraphs. So this is page 8 from the subject reader. And it goes on a little bit about, it's all about Rio Tinto and Australian-Indonesian trade. And this is why Indonesia and all states want trade. We don't see this happening. We just get the goods. But behind the scenes, trade ministers and businessmen and diplomats are doing this. They're making this happen. It doesn't happen accidentally. Okay, economic impact. Due to the large scale of the operations, the Grasberg mine has had a huge impact on the economical situation of Indonesia. Economic benefits include direct benefits, such as tax revenues and employment, and indirect economic benefits. The open pit operations are expected to continue until 2015, and then transition, blah, blah, blah. Right, next paragraph. The company is the largest taxpayer in Indonesia. In 2014, it provided $3 billion in tax. And across 92 to 2004, $33 billion in direct and indirect benefits, which is 2% of the GDP of Indonesia. Next paragraph. Along with the economic situation, it also has a huge effect on employment. In 2008, the company had 29,000 employees. And the article goes on and on and on. So these are the real benefits which show the effectiveness of Indonesia's efforts at bilateral trade. So you can say, yes, Indonesia has been effective at pursuing bilateral trade. You could also say that there are some limitations. And the main one, the most recent spying allegation. Once we got caught spying on them, this hindered trade between the two states. Yes, we're going to use it for everything. It stops everything happening well. I used a different one for each of the national interests. So there was just too much content. This makes it much easier because the same thing has stopped us working together on the environment, stopped us working together on the economy, stopped us working together on people movement. And yeah, that's literally her job. Yes, she would literally be one of the people with headphones on all the time listening to phone calls. That would be her job full time. Yeah. And she even said it. It was amazing. She said, yes, I am a spy. Electronic warfare is spying. And I had so many questions for her, but they're all a little bit patronising. So but yeah, it was amazing that she spoke about exactly what they got caught doing. But we invited her as well. Like, we asked her to come in. All right. Yeah. We won't hold it against her. All right. Two short videos which go to why this event is an obstacle. I'm going to do the second one first. It's better. So that event, us getting caught spying, has hindered trade.
There's growing concern that economic trade links could be at risk. Suryo Salisto is the chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. He spoke to the ABC's Indonesia correspondent Helen Brown.
Suryo Salisto, welcome to the program.
My pleasure, Helen.
What's your view of this rift that's developed between Indonesia and Australia?
Well, it's unfortunate. But as you know, Indonesia is a democratic country. Everybody has the right to say something, and of course, this matter has caused a lot of people are upset, to put it mildly. But to me, it is something that is upsetting, of course. We're disappointed, but I'm not surprised, frankly. I'm not surprised because this is something that happened already, as you know, with Angela Merkel, with David Cameron. So it's they're the best friends of America, and they're doing it to them as well, you know. So to me, of course, I think we ought to be upset about this thing, you know. After all, SBY is our leader, you know. From the business standpoint, of course, I hope that this will not affect our economic and business relations. And I've been telling to many of the journalists that asked my opinion the same. You know, I said that as far as business is concerned, I hope this will not affect our business. We have a lot to lose if we do.
Are you surprised that events have reached this stage? And it's happened so very quickly, though.
I'm surprised that it became so, what shall I say, so overwhelmingly, you know, the reaction is so emotional, you know. A lot of people even said, you know, let's just sever our relationship with Australia and all these things. But I'm trying to tell my friends in the government as well as in business to keep our heads cool and, you know, not to be too emotional about this matter. And, you know, think of the bigger picture, you know, that, you know, even with the best friends, sometimes this sort of thing can happen.
Now, looking at the business side, you say that you hope there won't be any ramifications. What kind of ramifications could there be, though? I mean, business usually operates separate to politics in many ways anyway, but what do you think what are some of the concerns you may have?
Well, some of the concerns would be because of political pressures, sometimes, our friends in the governments are forced, to make some steps that are counterproductive to our national interests. They may think it is, the right thing to do, but I think, it could be detrimental and it could be harmful to our business or our economy. So
he's alluding to businesses in Indonesia coming under pressure from the Indonesian government to stop. He's saying, government might hurt us. Represent the Indonesian Chamber. Represent everyone comes under pressure.
that is why I'm saying, look, let's be not emotional about these things, and let's just let the dust settle and carry on with our business.
And looking more generally at Australia doing business in Indonesia, there has been commentary that Australia isn't taking advantage of the moment and the opportunities. Now, this has been said for at least a year from my recall. Is that still the case? Is Australia not seeing what is possible here?
I would say it's very...
He's alluding to a lot of the issues with government putting pressure on Indonesian business, and you've got a really specific article in the subject reader. Indonesia calls on cattle importers to halt business with Australia. Page 15. And I'll just read the first 3 or 4 short paragraphs or sentences. So it reads as follows, and this is from the Guardian newspaper. Government, or Indonesian government, wants suspension until Australia shows genuine commitment to rebuilding trust after spying claims. The Indonesian government has asked cattle importers to stop buying Australian cattle until the two countries resolve the diplomatic problems caused by spying allegations. The Australian government noted that the report after the Indonesian Agricultural Minister, that's what I know, was quoted as saying that while deals were based on business relationships, importers should act in line with the government's stance. Yes. It would be economically a bad decision, but politically it would be what they would have to do if the government said that. If the government passes a law that says you cannot buy Australian beef, you can't buy Australian beef. That was under the Gillard government, yes. That wasn't a very smart move either. Yes. Well, they've been working on resolving it. Yes. That is actually literally what Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono said. He said, we want you to promise to not do it. And the direct, almost word-for-word quote from Prime Minister Abbott was, we will do what's in our best interest always. We will do what is in the national interest always. And we refuse to promise. Now, we could argue whether that's right or wrong, but this is... Who knows? Who knows what information they gathered? She would know, yes. So, I won't read through the rest of that article, but you get the point alone from the heading. The Indonesian government is calling on Indonesian cattle importers to stop buying our cattle. It's one of our biggest exporters, cattle. So this event is an obstacle. It's limiting bilateral trade. Bilateral economic relationship, lagging behind other relationships. Well, this is a second point. So the second point is investment between the two states is actually quite small. So if one reason we've been limited is because it's fine, another reason we've been limited is because the two states don't invest in each other very significantly. Yes.
So if we're evaluating this,
it's showing that the figure, it's complex. Yes, there are 120 Australian companies, so 38 Australian mining companies over there. However, this doesn't actually contribute that much of our foreign direct investment. So Australia invests as much in New Zealand, population 4 million, as it does Indonesia, population 250 million. So in fact, because the whole point of evaluating is showing that things work and things don't work. So what Indonesia did is working really well, and we saw the stats on the last slide, but it's also limited in how well it works. So it's limited here in two ways. Buying case, but also it's not working that well because investment is that significant. 0.5% of Australian foreign direct investment goes to Indonesia. Tiny. A tiny fraction for such a close neighbour. So really there's 2 points on that slide, but the spying is the big one. What is limiting our ability to do bilateral trade? Recent events around spying. And you've got a really specific example with the cattle. Your questions. What has Indonesia done? Number one. What are some signs that they've been effective? What have been the obstacles to their effectiveness? And the fifth one is specific. That should be four. Which specific item of trade is at risk and why? And there's actually a reference to two readings, both from the subject reader, which I just read a little bit from. So this really summarises this first bit, bilateral trade. And you have a go at them now, please.